this passage here made a connection between American presidents leading America into war and how this was probably a result of their having or not having neglected and abusive childhood. For instance, it gave examples of Ronald Reagan, whose childhood the passage explains was a nightmare of neglect and abuse. Again, a similar case was George Bush, whose childhood was full of fear and punishments, as the passage says. In contrast, it mentioned Jimmy Carter, another former American president, who was photographed with his mother smiling in the photograph, and that leads to us believing that he had fairly loving parents. He had a mother, as the passage says here in the first paragraph itself. He had a mother who encouraged his individuality and independence, and so this person was. It says here he had fairly loving parents, and this is why this particular example, which is Jimmy Carter, he was able to resist his nation's call for war. He did not lead America into war. So that is the connection that was made in the first part of the paragraph. Later, towards the end of the paragraph, right over here, it says that the general mood of America under such presidents also was pretty depressed. See, that's what it says. The mood of America was also quite depressed, it says. And then how right after World War II, since America's enemies had disappeared, there was no evil empire. See, it says here, no, there was no evil empire to fight. There were no real enemies, I should say, as the passage puts it. So that is why America and Europe were plunged into depression, because they had no one to fight. They could not see a visible enemy, and that is why there was a lot of depression. The mood was depressed, and there was a lot of gloom. Also, as the passage ends, it says that this also happened. It says after the fall of the Berlin Wall, which is communism. Before the fall of the Berlin Wall, communism was seen to be one huge enemy by the Americans. After communism collapsed in Germany and also later in Russia, what happened was that there was no real enemy for the Americans to fight, and that is how there was, as the passage says here, there were predictions of doom and decline and the death of the American dream. Right. So that's all we have as a summary to the passage. Now we can move on to the first question here, which says the treatment of Reagan by his father is incorrectly described by which of the following statements? Now A says his father used to revile him. Before we read the options, then let's get back to that part in the passage about Ronald Reagan. It's right here. It says Ronald Reagan's childhood was, in contrast, more like that of most presidents, a nightmare of neglect and abuse. In his case, dominated by an obsessively religious mother and a violent alcoholic father, right? So it says here that it was a nightmare of neglect and abuse, that he had an obsessively religious mother and a violent, abusive, alcoholic father. That's what it says here. And then it also goes on to say that his father used to often beat him, right? It says that he used to kick him with his boot and clobber him and his brother, and there was fear to the point of hysteria, right? So you can imagine what severe, catastrophic childhood poor Ronald Reagan had. But then that is how, as a result of this, when he grew up, when he was an adult, Reagan took to carrying a loaded pistol. He once considered suicide, and then he became later an anti-communist warrior, trying to crusade against imaginary enemies, that is the communists, right? That is what he felt, who were blamed for the feelings he denied in himself. That is the paragraph about Reagan. Anyway, now with that in mind, we can get back to the question. It says the treatment of Reagan by his father is incorrectly described by which of the following statements? His father used to revile him and abuse him, which left him with a neglected feeling. Absolutely correct. That's what we know about this question. What about the other one? It says his father used to lambast him, which was expressed by violence and abusive behavior. Yes, we have read that that was true. In his childhood, Regan was pummeled by his father. The word pummeled here being beaten violently. Yes, he was beaten violently by his father. His father used to verbally abuse him and his brother to the point where they developed feelings of rage. No, there was no rage, rather, it was fear. That is what is the emotion that the passage points out to. There was fear, not rage, fear to the point of hysteria, even phobias for that matter, and inherent phobias, and that is why we can mark D as the answer to our question, which is this is incorrectly, this particular point incorrectly describes the treatment that Regan got by his father.